Hi everyone and welcome to Noisebusters. First, I want to say a big thanks to all those people that have checked out our first episode. The response has been quite overwhelming. There's been a lot of people subscribing and sending good messages to us, so hopefully people are finding it useful and enjoying. We've got a lot of interesting people lined up to talk already, so we've got a back catalogue of people that we're interviewing to bring to you all to listen to. Have you enjoyed watching yourself talk, George?
Yes.
Do you watch it every night or just every couple of nights?
Most nights.
Yeah. Were you taking notes? Did you have anyone critique you? Or
it was perfection.
No edits required. So our next show will have an aviation focus, so stay tuned for that. But in this episode, we will be touching on various elements and talking to an acoustics heavyweight and diving into the world of low-frequency sound a bit as well. George and I are pleased to welcome Andy Moorhouse to the show. Hi, Andy. How you doing?
Hi there. Good, thanks. Good.
So Andy is well known throughout the industry, particularly by acoustics alumni of Salford, such as myself, and Liverpool Universities, like George. So Andy started his undergraduate life as a mechanical engineer, studying at Nottingham University. In 1985, he joined the Acoustics Research Unit at Liverpool Uni and undertook a Doctoral in research in acoustics. After completing this PhD, he moved into consultancy. In 1992, Andy rejoined the ARU and he worked on research projects largely focusing on structure-borne sound. During this time, he established an international reputation as an expert on the subject and was a pivotal member of the ARU in developing strong links with the industry, increasing consultancy activities, and building on his short course provisions. During his 11 years at the ARU, he strengthened links with other research groups, mainly in Europe and the Far East. Moving on a little bit, at the end of 2003, Andy was appointed to a lectureship at Salford University Acoustics Research Centre, which is where I met Andy. And Andy's research had expanded into virtual acoustic prototyping and low-frequency sound and vibration. The work on low-frequency sound has a political dimension and continues to have an impact throughout the industry today and is still being used very widely. Andy has created a strong research group at Salford by generating external funding for most of its activities from government, industry, and international sources. He has established links with Italian, Brazilian industry, and is particularly highly regarded in France and Germany. As a director of this ARC at the labs at Salford, he has expanded its revenue by developing the test facilities and contacts with industry and government. But outside acoustics, Andy is a talented jazz musician and a qualified teacher of the Alexandra technique, which is a process designed to retrain habitual patterns of movement and posture, benefiting physical well-being. So after that long introduction, which I think is very worthy of you, Andy, I thought we would just dive into a bit of your background. So I think George was going to take this one.
Yeah, no, Andy, I don't know if you know this, but we're both alumni. I'm also an engineer from Nottingham.
Of course you are. Yeah, you were in Wortley Hall, weren't you?
Yeah, it was Lenton and Wortley when I went.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Which one were you in?
Lenton.
Oh, you were really? Oh, wow. Yeah. Same hall.
Wortley was, they were the bad boys when I was there. Must have combined them with Lenton to calm them down a bit.
I actually was the Wortley part of Lenton and Wortley. So we could do the handshake.
Yeah.
They had no acoustics aspects when I was at Nottingham, and particularly not in the engineering department I was in. How did you get into acoustics after completing a mechanical engineering undergraduate? What started off? Why did you do it?
Well, I think my story is probably quite similar to other people at the time. Maybe less so now, but even now, there were no degrees in acoustics. And actually, the honest truth is, when I was looking for a university, I didn't know the word. I didn't know the word acoustics. I knew that I was interested in sound, and I knew because I was a musician. And I was interested in science, and I wanted to do something that was both. So I knew that was clear enough, but I didn't know it was called acoustics. So, so I looked at physics. I actually started with physics, and I moved to mechanical engineering, and ended up graduating there. And wasn't quite sure at first what I was going to do with it, and but I'm pleased I did now, because I think it's very useful background. And then I spotted this PhD advertised at Liverpool University, and thought, acoustics, that's what it's called. So I went to do the PhD, and that was my sort of routine, my real routine. So before that was general, really, but the PhD in acoustics was really my routine.
What was your PhD called?
It was called Structure-Borne Sound Emission of Machinery, I think, something like that. My thesis is on the shelf over there.
I was going to say, do you want to plug it if anybody wants to purchase it?
No,
is it on Amazon?
No, I don't really want people reading that.
Moved into the PhD, and then you sort of haven't looked back from there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I kind of realised when I got to the PhD that there was a subject, actually, because as I said, I knew I was interested in sound and science, but I didn't really know it was a subject until that point. And I think even today that's still the case.
I completely agree. I think if more people knew that it was a subject, we'd have a lot more people doing it. Yeah. But it's best we keep it quiet anyway, because then we're more in demand. I mean, not many people work both in consultancy and research, which you've done for nearly 30 years now. Is it what you expected when you left university?
I worked in industry, in a sort of fairly hardcore mechanical industry for a few years after I left Nottingham, designing power stations and stuff like that. It was definitely, for me, it was a deliberate choice to spend time in industry and time in academia. And I suspect I would have got on faster in academia had I gone straight in to research, But to me, it's important. It's really important that the research you do has to sort of work for real people. Not that academics aren't real people, but it's got to find application. So you've got to really understand what goes on in the industry and how things work. Mm-hmm. Consultancy was a similar sort of thing. I got very wide experience very quickly, because as an acoustician, you're in demand over such a wide range of industry. So I spent a lot of time in can factories, in quarries, in aircraft doing test flights, in architects' offices, incredibly wide range of industries. And
it's interesting to say that. I mean, you said that you felt that this consultancy aspect of it meant that you were possibly behind when you rejoined research, if I interpreted that right.
I wouldn't disagree with that. Yeah.
I worked sort of as in local government beforehand, and that's often the opinion is that if you go from going to local government and then go into consultancy, slows your career down. But I'm sort of agreeing with what you're saying, is that actually I feel that the experiences I had, I would never have had in consultancy, and it stood me in much better stead for my consultancy career than if I hadn't done it. And it sounds like it's the same sort of thing as you're saying, and that's what leads me on to what I was going to ask, is that if someone's thinking of moving into the acoustics industry, I mean, this is somebody, obviously you're somebody who's worked for it 30 years, so it'd be weird if you said no, but is it something you would recommend to them? And how do you think they would approach it or should approach it?
I would definitely recommend it, because I mean, it's a very wide subject, and the work is really interesting. And whatever your sort of particular interest, if you're an engineer, there's some really interesting engineering, which I've found over the years. I've found that increasingly impressive that engineers can build stuff that actually works, and how clever all that is, and how good their models are to get things right nearly all the time. You know, as you get the sciencey side, but if you're interested in psychology or environment or anything like that, even medical, the medical side, there's something in acoustics for you. So the work is really interesting. It's not widely known about, so you sort of quickly join a sort of a rare bunch of people with very particular skills. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun doing acoustics.
I always think it's not only to do with the diversity of work, but it's also the diversity of people. Like there isn't. I mean, Dan is one of the few pure bloods in terms of he did pure acoustics, but I would say a majority of people have come from an array of backgrounds. It's not often I meet another engineer, particularly not one that went to my hall.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I've got no objection to people going straight into acoustics. If they know what they want to do and they find the course, great, go for it. For me, it's been good. I suppose in work in general, you get sort of generalists and specialists. So specialists are people who become very good at one narrow field, and generalists are people who maintain a sort of broader view, and you don't have the time then to get very good at one specific thing. So I've always considered myself quite a generalist. If you happen to find the course that you like, then which a large number of people in acoustics don't. When on open days at Salford, we'd say, "How did you find out about the course?" And about half the time, people would say, "Well, completely by accident." So, but if you do find it, then go for it. Yeah.
I mean, you've been involved in many areas of acoustics, Andy, especially well known for links to vibration, low frequency sound, and structure-borne sound.
Yep.
I mean, they scream to me as your focus. I know you're generalist, but why did you choose those avenues over others? What really stuck out for you?
I mean, I had quite a good background in vibration in that my degree supervisor was Professor Jeff Warburton, who's a famous guy in dynamics, in structural dynamics. So I had a good sort of grounding there. So I was always comfortable with vibration. And a lot of acousticians aren't comfortable with vibration, so I tended to get given those jobs, but I quite like them anyway because it's sort of vibration acoustics. It's a sort of I don't know, the two sides of the same thing. And I quite like that. So the low frequency sound, it more or less happened to me. I didn't particularly choose it. It just kind of came up, and it chose me.
Did you think all of that coming from your mechanical background and that was what you were more interested in, and you kind of just wanted to lead that into the acoustics world, less so than more of the musical side of things?
I always felt comfortable with the structural dynamics side, and I think because I had such good probably I think I have Jeff Warburton to thank for that. I think he is no longer with us, sadly. But
so Andy, what advice would you give to someone who wants to follow the research path? I mean, it's specific, and some people go in straight after uni, and some people come back in to kind of further themselves from another degree. But in terms of research being probably predominantly most of your career, what would you advise people that want to get into research? What would prepare them for it? What would help them through it?
If you want to get into research, you've got to really do a PhD. So you've got to find a PhD. Once you've done a PhD, you become good at a particular area, and you want to not move on. You want to sort of keep building on that, really, if you can. I mean, it's not always possible, because if you do PhDs which are funded by a particular industry, they have a particular focus, and you can't always pick pick the projects that you do in the future. But you need to have a sort of a major. I think one thing that PhD students don't necessarily realise till later is that when you're doing a PhD, especially in the early stages, you do a lot of reading. That you never again in your career get the chance to do that kind of depth of reading. So you're never quite going to become quite as expert in another field, probably. So that body of literature which you've assimilated, which you probably sort of, because it's become so familiar, you've probably sort of lost sight of how significant that is. So don't take that for granted.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that it's better to come to a research thing a bit later in your career then, when you've had a bit of time to taste a few things like you had? You went to industry for a bit and then figured out what you might want to focus on, rather than going straight through?
I think it's very much a personal thing. I did that. That was a deliberate choice. Was it a deliberate choice? Let's pretend it was a deliberate choice.
Okay.
One of my up-and-coming PhD students, who's going absolutely great guns, he's done his degree, he's gone straight into a PhD, and he's come straight out and got a lectureship, and he's absolutely going for it. That's Josh Miggett, name to watch. And so clearly that was, completely different to how I did it, but he's doing so well, you can't possibly say that he's not picked the right path for himself, So
what I wanted to ask about is a bit about low frequency sound, because obviously we wanted to have a specific topic. But how would you describe low frequency sound, and why is it an important factor to consider?
Right. Okay, I'm going to annoy you now. Low frequency sound is sound at low frequencies. Right.
End of episode. Yeah.
The question is, what is low frequency? We kind of know what sound is, I think, don't we? So, but what is low frequency? Now that's not an obvious question. We tend, what we're taught, what we learn is that the audible range runs from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So, below 20 hertz would be considered infrasound. In other words, that's beyond it's sound. So sound is a physical phenomenon, the movement, the movement of air. But if it's infrasound, it means it's below the frequency at which can be heard. Now, so low frequency sound tends to be used for anything that's between 20 hertz, the sort of nominal cutoff, and 160 hertz, something like that, 200 hertz perhaps. The cutoff between low frequency and infrasound is not a sharp cutoff, and it's not actually a real cutoff at all. It just means that you get the ear gets less and less sensitive as you go down in frequency, but you can hear sound well below 20 hertz. So in a sense, the level has to be raised because you're less sensitive, but the hearing mechanism still works down there. So there isn't really a cut-off between low frequency sound and infrasound. When you say why is it important, it is because quite often when you hear the word low frequency sound, it's not at all certain whether you are actually dealing with sound. Because you have people that complain about hearing low frequency sound and it can't be detected. So, I mean, you can't just write them off and say, well, they're nutters, because that would be a misunderstanding of how perception works, But we did some research in this. We came across a few cases where there were genuine complaints about low frequency sound. People described the sound that they could hear. We couldn't detect a physical sound at all, and at least one that corresponded to their description. There is still a bit of a mystery there about why people hear the low frequency sounds. I mean, the complaints would be sort of very consistent, self-consistent, and genuine. But we would try to use every avenue to detect the sound that was being described, and in a few cases, not every case, sometimes we did find a sound that corresponded to the complaint, or to the description, and sometimes we didn't, and we were convinced eventually that no matter how long we looked, we would not find a physical sound. So then there's a question: why are these people complaining about sound? Which we can't detect externally. You get people who are really very distressed about the sound that they're hearing, and yet we couldn't find a sound. So
having worked in local authority, I completely understand what you're saying. Is that a lot of the structures in terms of the assessments that we have aren't applicable to those situations, and you, in a way, you feel relatively helpless because you can't, within the confines of the equipment or the guidance that you have, actually tell that person anything other than whatever you're experiencing, I'm not experiencing, and I've nothing I can demonstrate shows it exists, and it's incredibly frustrating and upsetting for them. You were involved with Nano 45, which is relating to the assessment of low frequency noise, which is still pertinent throughout the industry. How did that come about? I mean, how did that actual guidance come about? Was it sort of just to address what they could be considered these potential shortfalls, or was it something else? Or
this coincided just with when I was moving to Salford. It was kind of very well timed in that sense. I'd had previous experience of a case. I can't say where the case was, but where there was a whole housing estate was complaining about, not a whole, this was how it was presented to me, that the whole housing estate was complaining about low frequency noise from a factory. When I went there, I found that it wasn't a whole housing estate. It was a number of individuals spread around the housing estate, and actually their descriptions of the sound was a little bit different in certain cases. So, but this had blown up into quite a big local issue, and it was consuming a lot of the environmental health officers' time. They were getting absolutely nowhere with it. It was anything they did just seemed to increase the sort of stress levels of the complainants, and nothing really got solved. Just after that, not because of that case, but probably because of a number of similar cases, DEFRA seemed to have realised that DEFRA, who's kind of responsible for environmental health officers, and they'd realised that the environmental health officers were getting involved in these cases, unable to sort of, they were getting stuck with them in that they didn't have any they didn't have any clear guidance. They couldn't solve the problem because in some cases they couldn't find a problem. I think DEFRA's main purpose was to try to sort of give environmental health officers some help to sort of solve these cases, or at least to limit the time that they were spending on them. They found some money for some research, and having had recent experience of a real case, I put in an application and we got we won the contract.
Actually, just this second, someone's come to pick up our fridge in the hall, so
right.
It might be a good time just to take a quick break.
Someone's just come to do a harp concert in our outhouse, so.
Are you joking?
It's a bit more extravagant than the fridge being picked up.
Yeah, we can have a break. Yeah, either way.
Oh no, I don't need one. I'm just checking you're okay.
No, I'm fine. Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Dan, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks.
Sounds like we're all okay. Anyway.
Right.
So, Andy, in terms of that process for Nano 45, what happened to develop the actual, closing document, and what was the process involved? What testing did you do, and what was the focus of it?
We did two main parts. We went out to real cases of complaints, and we did extensive survey work to try to find out, whether there was a real noise, whether there was no noise, whether we thought the complainants were making it up, or we didn't quite ask that question, but that had we had a trained sociologist. I think she called herself sociologist, who was skilled in asking structured questions. So we'd go along, record the sound over several days. Several days and nights. The sociologist Mags Adams went out to do the interviews, and we also asked the complainant to collect a log of what they were experiencing. Then the second main part was some lab tests. So we had subjects who were, some of them were low frequency noise sufferers and some of them were not. They were sort of controls. And we brought them into the lab and we played them various low frequency sounds, and we tried to measure their reaction to those sounds. Their sort of psychological reaction, to see if we could find a difference between people who were suffering from low frequency sound and people who weren't. So it was about years worth of research. I think various people were involved.
How did you then get from that to the kind of closing criteria?
DEFRA wanted, as an outcome of the project, they wanted some clear guidelines for environmental health officers. And it wasn't obvious at the beginning, but during the course of the research, we realised that we needed some physical criterion for physical sound. And we decided that if the sound was based on the threshold of hearing. There are measured thresholds of hearing that go right down to 10 hertz. They're published. They're not usually used because it's below the low frequency threshold. But the data is there, so we were able to use these the hearing thresholds, and we more or less adopted the criterion that if it was below the threshold of hearing, then we would say that it was unlikely that the physical sound was causing the problem. Actually, that's not as black and white as it sounds at all, because people's hearing threshold varies, and hearing threshold isn't even in an individual person. It's not a hard and fast thing anyway.
People's hearing ability varies, but you've got the subjective side varies. Obviously, there's sources that may or may not have significant levels of low frequency sound that are experienced by people with equivocal hearing ability completely differently, because some people don't like it and so other people do, and then you've got to marry that up with the sort of the physical side. Which is probably why this Nano 45 was what. I'm trying to remember. It was the mid 2000s, wasn't it? And then I think was there an update? I can't remember.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, there wasn't particularly further research, but we found a mistake, so we had to correct it.
Cut that bit out, Dan.
Well, it's all resolved now, George. It's fine.
We did find a mistake. It was fortunately, it was not a big mistake, but we corrected it. The second half of the criterion, so we had the physical criterion for physical sound based on hearing thresholds, but we also worked out during the course of the project that you also needed to determine if the complainant's description of the sound matched their what you were actually measuring. For example, you might have someone who says in the middle of the night, 2:30 a.m., woken up, sound deafening, right? And then you'd trawl through the recordings and you'd see if anything happened at that time that could correspond to that. And so you have to be quite painstaking about it, but if you're trying to prove whether a sound is physical or not, it's you're trying to prove a negative, which is sort of philosophically impossible. So you've got to eliminate all the possibilities that it might be there.
I've done a few of these low frequency noise assessments using the Nano 4.5 over the years, and it's very difficult sometimes to pin down when the noise is happening and what kind of noise it is, and sometimes it's the central heating system or the water boiler or anything else inside the home rather than something else, or sometimes it's vibration. It can be linked to all sorts of things. So I guess what I think the procedure is very good. I think it's useful because it fills a hole, even though it's quite a few years old now. It's still good to rely on. So what has been the feedback on the implementation of this criterion procedure? Have you had anything of people using it well? Some things they might change?
There was a third element, now I remember it, in the project, which was a kind of tagged on element. So once we derived the criteria, DEFRA were really happy with it. They said, right, we need to try this out. So we did a sort of a mini add-on project, which was we solicited some environmental health officers who wanted to try it out. They had cases in their area and they wanted to see if they could sort of solve them more quickly by using the procedure. So we did, I think, at least five field studies with environmental health officers, and they were pretty positive about that. It's very easy to feel vulnerable as an environmental health officer. You've got, the stress levels, the sort of these things tend to be quite fired up and emotive. These issues, because people are very, very disturbed by it. So, the stakes are relatively high if you're an environmental health officer. It's almost certainly, unless you're a very confident environmental health officer with a very strong background in acoustics, which isn't always the case, then you're going to feel out of your comfort zone. So having some sort of criterion to work to it has been quite comforting for EHOs, I think. From the case studies, we found that they were split roughly a third, and a third. And a third of cases, we found that we had a clear physical low frequency sound that did correspond to the complainant's description. It switched on and off at the times they said they could hear it, and so on. So that was clear cut. There was a physical sound that was the cause of their problems, it seemed. Then there was another set where we did not find a physical sound that corresponded, or that we thought should be even audible. So that's a tricky one, because you have to sort of exhaustively go through the stuff and find that, but we got to the stage where we were convinced that no matter how much longer we spent looking, we were not going to find something, that we were not going to find a physical sound there. So there was a third of cases where definitely physical sound caused, and there was a third of cases where there definitely wasn't a physical sound, and there was a third in the middle where we sort of really we couldn't get to the bottom of. We weren't sure. They were inconclusive. So a Danish group did they did some a little bit similar, and they found pretty much the same split. That there was a third, and a third.
What's happened since then, Andy? Are you aware of what's kind of followed on from that in terms of low frequency sound assessment procedure?
The assessment procedure seems to be going ahead, and I know the Environment Agency use it quite a lot now. I think is it in BS 4142 even?
Yeah, it is.
I think it might be. But you have, in the cases where you find that you have no physical sound, or maybe even there is a sound, but it's not enough for an environmental health officer to say that it's a nuisance. Then you've got someone who's very distressed, and you haven't got a solution for them. So that was the sort of missing at that stage when we finished the Nano 45 project. That was the sort of hole in the whole thing, was that we had nothing for those people. We got some more funding from DEFRA to look at involving audiology clinics in a treatment. I hesitate to use the word treatment, but you know, because it sort of medicalizes this experience of these people, which I think is not a great idea. People who suffer from tinnitus, and I got in touch with I think he's probably one of the world experts in tinnitus treatment, Professor David Bagley, who's now at Nottingham University, I think. Where George and I both did our degrees. He explained to me, very interesting. He said there have been great strides in the treatment of tinnitus in the last, or in the understanding of the phenomenon. It's a very common phenomenon, but it's not widely understood. And you get anomalies like you get some people with a matched level of tinnitus. So that's, you know, you can match the level. So you play a sound and then and you adjust the level until it's the same level as the internal sound that the tinnitus sufferer can hear. And you get people with matched levels that are very high, and it doesn't trouble them. And yet you get people with very low levels of matched sound, so low-level tinnitus, and they are driven absolutely mad by it. They've made great strides in understanding why that might be the case, and also what to do about it. We set up this low-frequency network project where we explained all this to a number of tinnitus specialists in audiology clinics around the country. I think we had 8 or so audiology centres. And we gave them training in you know, what is low frequency sound and why might these people be suffering. And then David Bagley gave them some extra training in, right, here's a possible model for why they are so disturbed. So in a sense, what we're doing is turning the thing around. We're saying, right, what they often say is, right, I just want this sound to go away. I want somebody to go out there, find the source of the sound and remove it. And we're turning it around and saying the other way, right, well, you're reacting to this sound, and that you can't do anything about the sound. But what you can do, you know, it's what the sportsmen say, control the controllables, isn't it? And don't worry about the rest. So the thing that is controllable potentially is your reaction to the sound. So that's something that you can do. So this low frequency network project was firstly to train the audiologists in these models that they're using now in tinnitus treatment. It's not the same as low frequency noise, I should stress. You know, it's never been proved that it is the same. But the sort of hypothesis was that the same techniques could potentially help low frequency noise sufferers. And David Bagley explained that you've got, the hearing system was developed for defense, you know, and it's, you know, this is tens of millions of years we've been able to hear. Not me personally, but yeah, I said I was retiring, didn't I? So the hearing system has been developing for tens of millions of years, but people have been able to speak for, you know, we don't know, let's say 50,000 years, something like that. So speech is a very recent addition. So the hearing system has not developed for communication. It's developed for survival. So it means that when you hear a sound that could signal a threat, the response is very, very fast and very powerful. It's no use having a hearing system that's really effective at picking up sounds if it's not linked to the systems of reaction. So our hearing system is, that's been around for a lot longer than we've been human, is linked to raw survival instinct. Now, what happens, they think, in tinnitus, I'm probably getting this all wrong, so apologies to tinnitus specialists. But what normally happens is the sound comes in and there's a sort of filter. And if that sound is kind of categorized as a non-threat, then we can habituate to that sound. So it becomes less and less evident. Our attention is not focused on the sound. Now, the opposite is that a sound comes into the hearing system. If that is categorized as a possible threat, then the organism automatically puts more attention on that sound and gets ready for action. Mm-hmm. David Bagley gave me the figures, and I can't remember the figures, but essentially you hear a sound that could be a threat, a burglar in the night, for example, on the stairs, and within so many milliseconds, adrenaline is injected into the bloodstream. So we're suddenly wide awake because it's a potential threat, and the organism is designed to cope with, to deal with threats. But if this goes wrong and sounds that are actually not harmful are sort of categorized as harmful, potentially harmful, then all of these the limbic system and these emotional brain systems are sort of active. They're very fast, and the reaction is very powerful. So they're all activated. So you might have, for example, what low-frequency noise sufferers complain about a lot. You might get sweaty palms. You might get, you might go pale. And these are signs potentially of alertness to danger. So it might be that your body thinks that you're under threat, and it's getting ready for this threat. There's also the conscious pathway. So wait a minute, that's a sound. This is actually slower, I think, than the emotional pathway. But there's a conscious pathway where you say, okay, I can hear a sound now. But then that conscious pathway is also, hold on a minute, I'm getting sweaty palms here. So that tends to increase the stress level. And the increased stress level tends to put more attention on the incoming sound and so on. So there's rather than a habituation loop, which sort of runs down, you get a loop which runs upwards. That's probably a very bad description of a possible model for disturbance in tinnitus, which may perhaps apply to low frequency sound. So the good news is that if it is that loop, then you can potentially get in there, and this is what tinnitus treatments, some of them I believe, rely on, is in sort of breaking that loop. You need to create an understanding that the sound is not harmful. So on the conscious pathway, at least the conscious pathway is aware that there isn't a threat.
Probably you'll experience more the conscious pathway where somebody becomes aware of something annoying them more and more. Mm-hmm. As they, it maybe even, somebody pointed, you mentioned somewhere where there was a housing estate with a number of people. It may be that one person experienced it and said, "Have you heard that?" Mm-hmm. And they go, "Oh yeah, I can hear that." But the one I hadn't thought about was the unconscious element. And I suppose, considering it's a threat, is there ever the case where, as you realise it isn't a threat, like, other things that may disturb you? So, say if you live next to a railway line, when you first move in, it disturbs you, but then after a while, it's disturbing when it's not there. Yeah. I wonder if that is sort of something that people just, I'm not going to say grow out of, but it's something that they get used to. And it's those final ones that don't fall into that category. And sort of was going to lead me on to the question was, when you started the Nano 45 stuff, did you think it was going to be hard to find examples of low frequency noise complaints, or were you surprised that there were more or less than what you thought there was going to be?
It didn't particularly occur to me while we were doing Nano 45, but when we did the follow-up, the low frequency noise network, we had to look for subjects in local authorities and so on, and we found it quite a lot harder to find those than we thought. We also did. It wasn't part of the project, but we just had the opportunity to do it, so we did it, which was to ask audiologists how many cases of low frequency noise they had come to their clinic, and so that question had never been asked before, and I can't remember what the numbers were, but it wasn't that many. Of course, not every case of low frequency noise disturbance ends up at an audiology clinic, but it's an indicator. It wasn't thousands, it wasn't tens of thousands, it was hundreds, if that. So my suspicion is that this is not a particularly widespread issue in terms of numbers of people. It possibly gives the impression of being more people than it is, because the cases tend not to go away. They tend not to get solved, so they come up again and again.
What kind of myths do you think are in this kind of remit of low frequency sound? What over the years have you come across that you've had to go, that really isn't the case? And this is hard because there's so many unanswered things about it.
People talk about the hum, but I'm not convinced the hum, there is such a thing as the hum. Some people seem to want to believe that there's a sound everywhere. Quite often there's a conspiracy theory type of background to that. And I've never seen any evidence of a hum that's everywhere.
So Andy, in terms of projects, what would you say have been your career highlights, or things that you look back on and think that was really cool?
I think the bit I've definitely enjoyed most is working with PhD students, particularly students in general, except you, George, of course.
Thanks, Andy.
No, students in general, very, very rewarding. You know, when you get a motivated student who's learning stuff, it's very, very rewarding. And then that goes on sometimes to. I'm working now with Andy Elliott quite a lot. Well, he was my PhD student about 10 years ago, and he can do stuff that nobody else can do, you know, and that's really very, very impressive, you know. And it's sophisticated stuff, you know. I mean, I think engineering in general is you know, I think it's the pinnacle of human achievement, personally, in many respects, you know. And you've got someone who's really up there doing very sophisticated engineering. It's really quite impressive.
It's a very humble answer, that, Andy. I think you're basically saying that your greatest success is other people's successes.
There's an element of that in that I think the main thing, I suppose, that I've been able to do is just been able to give those people a bit of an opportunity. So that is a career highlight. You know, you're really highly inventive, highly sophisticated, and highly trained and everything. And to have been able to give them a bit of a start to get where they are is a career highlight. No doubt about that.
On the other side of that, are there any challenges you've had yourself that you think back and think, wow, that was difficult, or took you a while to get through? What kind of challenges have you been through, Andy?
Work.
Yes. All of the challenges, I would say, are not technical ones. I mean, the technical ones are there, obviously, but they're always kind of fun, really enjoyable, you know. So the challenging things really are to do with people.
Yeah,
you know, you get awkward people or people.
Name names, Andy. That's fine.
Like on George again.
No, I'm sure we've all got a few of those, you know. projects that didn't go right, and it was not because technically usually, but because of personnel, and in a career, the chances are that your biggest challenge is going to be to do with people issues rather than technical, I would guess.
I think that's interesting. I think that when you come from a technical background, it becomes challenging because you're maybe not prepared for it as well. It's like you just want to focus on the acoustics, get the sound bit right, and then it's like all this other crap gets thrown at you, and you're like, oh God, I've got to actually do acoustics maybe 30-40% of the time, if that, when you get 2 years in, and then you're dealing with people, like more communication and managing costs, getting money to do things,
understanding the client. And I mean, I've sat on quite a lot of interview panels, and you often get candidates that have done a bit of waitering or retail or something like that, and they tend to think of it as being not very important. But when I look at that, I think this person spent so long in working in retail or something. Now, if they've done that properly, they've got to understand what the customer wants. They've got to spot the awkward customers and sort of preempt their awkwardness, and so there's a lot of skills there, which are general skills. So I wouldn't write. I'd be interested in that kind of experience and see whether I guess you can work in a shop and just sort of twiddle your thumbs and not learn much as well. But if you apply yourself to it, you can learn really, like you say, Dan, 60% of your job is going to be.
I wish I'd put that I was Lenton and Wortley barman for 2.5 years on my CV, and maybe I would have got a bit more interest at the beginning.
I think we'd make an exception for that one.
Yeah, I think that the name carries too much of a blacklisting kind of mark. I felt that when we hit the recession, and we talked about it in the last episode, that when I went into retail because there was no jobs, and then that frightened the hell out of me because I was used to being in the back of kitchens or whatever, away from the public eye. That was probably a choice of my manager, but it was quite good to actually get out in front. And I remember the first time I went out to go serve a customer at a till, and I was myself. I just was like, oh my God, this is hell. I hate this. I can't even look people in the eye. But doing that for like 1.5 years just made me so much more confident to be that kind of person, and helped so much. Like I think you're so right that it's really overlooked as that part of your development.
In a sense, certain careers, once you've been in them for so many years or so many decades, you kind of know them. But the bit you're never going to get to the end of it is understanding the people. So I think it's a good career tip personally to take an interest in people, because you're never going to run out of interest. Any job that you do anywhere, you're going to have to deal with people, and learning what makes people work is quite a rewarding study, and very, very useful.
So, Andy, I perused the Salford University website to get your bio, and one of the things it mentions, other than you being a musician, is the Alexander technique, which I can't say I spent very long reading up about it because I got a bit confused. But is it possible to explain a little bit about what it is?
Like a lot of acousticians, I had a musical background, so I was a sort of reasonably serious musician, and I played quite a lot. I played professionally. I found that whenever I practiced, I tend to actually get worse when I practiced, which is not the idea really. I realised that it's because I was tense. I had sort of bad posture, and I had bad habits that were tensing me up. And the more I played, the worse those habits would get. And then I came across this thing called the Alexander technique. And I went for a lesson. It's not like a therapy. The Alexander teachers call it they call themselves teachers and they call you a student, because the idea is that you learn new ways of avoiding harmful habits. Habits are very sort of powerful things, and it's not so easy to not do habits. And most people have all sorts of habits that they don't even know that they've got, but they're doing stuff all the time that takes up energy, and they don't even know they're doing it probably. But if they didn't do it, then they'd be able to do what they want to do much more effectively. So, for example, on the piano, I was tightening my shoulders and my neck. I didn't need to do that, but it actually made it harder to play. I started learning this Alexander technique, and I just found it so fascinating that after probably about 20 years after my first lesson, I was still fascinated by it. I decided to train to be a teacher. So I went part-time on my job at uni to do the training. It's quite a long training. It's 3-year full-time training. Fortunately, the school was just down. It was in it was in sort of Fallowfield. So I was able to sort of go in, do a morning at the school, and then go into the uni and work till about 7. And sort of to keep up both for those 3 years. And so now I'm a qualified teacher. It's an extraordinary technique. It's amazing that it's not better known.
And do you still practice it now?
Yeah. I mean, at the very moment, it's quite difficult because we were stopped from practicing because of COVID. Because the usual way to teach is one-to-one. So you teach with your hands, sort of thing. So you sort of guide someone into a new way of doing something. So that could be getting into a chair. It could be using a typewriter keyboard, using a mobile phone, riding a bike, climbing a stair. It can be literally anything that you do, any type of movement. You sort of work with them to sort of unpick the things that they're doing that they don't need to do, that is wasting their energy and interrupting the sort of coherence of their system. Because it turns out the philosophy is utterly different to engineering of Alexander's technique. And it turns out that there are no separate parts in the body. The body works as a whole. So quite often if someone has an aching knee, with the Alexander technique, you might find that, well, if they weren't tightening the neck, they wouldn't have an aching knee. So the symptom is not necessarily where the problem is, sort of thing. So you work on the overall coordination and you find what it is that's interrupting that overall coordination. Alexander, the initiator of the technique, he said, stop doing the wrong thing and the right thing will do itself. Mm-hmm. So it's more focusing on what not to do than on what you do.
That's interesting because I noticed in the past few months my knee is starting to hurt, and so I'm getting into an old man. So maybe I'm tensing up somewhere. I don't know. I'm just going to have to.
It could be that you've bashed it or something, but far more of the problems, in my experience so far, that people have with sort of sore knee and stuff like that, far more of them than you realise are things that you're actually doing to yourself.
Because I suppose I looked it up and it's on the NHS website, so it's people are aware of it. But what is the most common ailment people come to you that isn't maybe addressed through taking pills or something?
I think backache is pretty common. So many people have aching back or some sort of sciatica or something, it's very debilitating. Somebody said to me, he said, "When are you old? At what age? You're old when your back goes." And there's an element of truth in that. It doesn't matter how many years old you are. If your back's gone, you're going to be old, sort of thing. So you better look after your back. If you get into bad habits using a computer, you can do all sorts of horrible things to your back which don't find you out straight away, but over years of bad habits, the effect can accumulate. You end up with a problem.
That's one of my theories about this the lockdown in this country and people moving to working at home is that the way people work, the flexibility of how people work in terms of not having to go to work is obviously a great positive. But also, the environment in which they work in is in an office, it is generally regulated through checks and people making sure you have the right equipment. At home, you don't get that. And I think, whatever is the number of people that have, work associated issues has surely got to go up when people move home. So their well-being will go up, but their associated health may be compromised more. And it's something that you don't hear much about yet.
That's very interesting, and I think you could well be right. But what is also happening in my experience is that people are starting to get the idea more that they need to look after themselves. If they're not looking after themselves, then who is going to look after themselves? and also, we don't really have a good understanding generally of coordination, say. I mean, certain people are very coordinated. If you look at, say, Roger Federer, he's extremely coordinated, and if something goes wrong, he doesn't let that get to him psychologically. So he knows how to get himself back in shape for the next point, sort of thing. Some people are naturally in good shape, but once they get out of shape, they don't know how to get back. But Federer seems to be someone who's probably naturally in good shape, but he can consciously get himself back into good shape. And most of us don't have a clue how to do that. But if we did know that, we'd be able to do everything better. Play sports, perform in any way, think probably.
Really.
So what do people need to do? Where can they find out more information about this? Useful information, Andy.
About Alexander technique. There is. If you go on, there's quite a lot of stuff on the web. I haven't got a website myself at the moment because I'm sort of just moved house, so I'm not doing much work until I've established in the new house. But the plan is to build up my Alexander work. There's the Alexander Society, Teachers of the Alexander Technique. Their website has some good stuff on it,
and it's the NHS it's on there as well on their website.
Yeah, that's right. The NHS description is not a bad one. People who've trained in it tend to use a very particular type of language, and other people usually don't get that quite right. The NHS one is not bad, actually. It's been quite well written, if I remember right.
I paraphrased it in my notes saying methods of unlearning harmful habits.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
E+, yeah.
Cool.
So I think it's time to dive into the news, George. So let's crack a beer as we usually do. I think Andy was drinking tea last time I talked to him, so I don't know if it's a bit early for him to drink, but George is always game.
That's fine now. It's 8 o'clock, and that's my normal beer curfew.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So if I had a beer, I'd probably drink one now.
Oh, well, there you go. We'll have to send you some.
Definitely will be doing. So I'm having cream ale.
I've got Jemima's Pitchfork, which is from Glamorgan.
Oh, nice. Cheers, everyone. Cheers, Andy, for the future.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for this, Andy. It's been brilliant.
A couple of articles I wanted to share was Andy kind of hinted on it, the whole hum thing. So apparently the Windsor Hum that is referred to outside Detroit, apparently it went away, and a steel factory outside Detroit has stopped its operations indefinitely, and people are starting to attribute this hum going away.
Is this a famous hum, is it?
Yeah, the Windsor Hum's quite a famous one. Yeah. Because you read about these hum things all the time, and I don't think there's that much weight in it sometimes. But for a lot of people to be saying I think it's just this low frequency presence has maybe disappeared from the operating of a mill or a furnace or something. It's just stopped, probably, rather than being a hum from everywhere like that's described. So yeah, and the other article that I was looking at was this. It links to COVID a little bit with the. Basically, NFL have started up, but they're obviously not getting fans. They're putting on fake crowd noise to simulate that the crowd's there, and people are complaining like hell that this sounds weird and is putting players off and things like that. So what do you think about that?
It's quite common over here. They've had fake crowd noise since the well, they call it the restart for the Premier League, but but you have the option to switch it off, and quite a few people turn it off because you can hear the people shouting at each other. But I personally wonder whether anybody's looked at introducing people noise into offices. So because I certainly was going into the office during the lockdown and feeling extremely lonely.
No one to talk at. Yeah.
I just have your constant drone that would remind me of when you used to sit next to me.
Yeah. Andy, have you ever come across anything like this with the kind of simulation of audience sound? Seems weird, but
yeah. It's we have it all the time now. Premier League.
Well, you need it, don't you?
Here we go.
Snooking as well.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah. Must be behind the curve in Canada.
We have actual fans, I think that's the thing. Yeah, because I thought that when you watch like a TV show and they artificially put like audience laughter that just doesn't line up with the joke or the thing that's happened, that's the thing that comes to mind when I think of fake crowd noise. Like, it just doesn't match. You get this eruption of laughter from a really terrible joke. It's just... George carries a little unit round with him that he uses whenever he cracks a joke. So it's been great to have you on, Andy, and really appreciate your time. I've found it really insightful, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know about. I'm really interested in the kind of backstories of how things came about, and I think a lot of people are. People tend to chuck guidance around like it's, it is what it is, and don't really know where it came from and why it was even done in the first place. So,
and best of luck with the move as well.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much.
So if you're watching video, please put a like, comment, and share the video. A lot of people have shared and subscribed to this channel, which is crazy. And if you're listening on the podcast, it would be great if you could rate it, leave a review, and subscribe as well. If you have a story to tell or are working on something interesting that you want to share with the world, maybe acoustics focused, if you can help it. But noisebustersdb@gmail.com is the way to get hold of us. I will speak to you all soon.